Good morning and welcome to another episode of Titan Talk, the podcast everybody in Mercer County is talking about. I'm your host, David Sullivan.
And I'm Noah Savage.
And I'm Peyton Rule.
Good morning, guys. How are you all?
Good.
We're coming to you from the beautiful Dennis Davis Studios, located on the Evan Harlow campus in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. We're excited to bring you all the weekly news with special guest commentary and hopefully something that you can use. Don't forget, if you like this podcast, tell all your friends and subscribe to on YouTube. Today, our guest, we are so excited and privileged to have Mr. Walter Taylor. Mr. Taylor, welcome.
Thank you.
We're so excited for you to be here.
I'm excited myself.
Well,
I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, we've got a funny little story to tell you. This has been a whole year in the making trying to get you here. As you're aware of, but probably not a lot of other people, last year, you and your wife were gracious enough to come to speak to one of our classes. I think it was like last February.
Yes, sir.
And actually, we were talking to your wife, I think is how it went. And she was describing the famous march from Harrodsburg, or the bus trip from Harrodsburg to Frankfurt when Dr. King was there in Frankfurt. And I remember you said, I'd never met you before, but you were sitting in the back and she was describing everything that was happening. We were asking some questions and I don't know how it came up, but just somehow somebody mentioned something and you stood up and you said, well, you know, I marched with Dr. King. I was at Selma and the whole class went quiet and everybody kind of, we couldn't believe it, and you came in and told some amazing stories, and we knew right then and there, Mr. Guerin, myself, and some other people, we decided we have got to get this on tape, and we didn't even have a podcast then. We didn't have any. There was no equipment. There was nothing like that, but we knew a year ago that we're like, we want to come and hear your stories and hear your experiences. So we decided we would get a podcast together, and you were really the guest that we were most excited to get here because we just knew that, this was a treasure of somebody that had so many great experiences. So we really are grateful that you're here today. We've got a lot to talk about. I wanted to, if I can, we'll just start, and then you can kind of take us where you'd like to go. But we wanted to talk about Selma for a few minutes. Our kids have done a little study. We've seen the movie, but you were there. We've been doing some research. I didn't really realize there was actually 3 marches. That there were, one that was ended horribly, and then the second with Dr. King, and then a third one that actually made it all the way to Montgomery. But can you tell us what you were there, how the experience was? Just fill us in on this march.
At that particular time, my dad and Dr. King were very close. Me personally, I didn't too much care for Dr. King because I felt like he.
You don't hear that very often.
But I was a young lad, around 10 or 11 years old. I felt Dr. King was taking my father away from the family. Every time we went to do something, Dr. King would call my dad. Would break like a quarter horse. My mother didn't want me and my sister to go on marches, but my dad said it would be interesting and one day it would be history.
Right. So he recognized that even back then it would be history.
And they was making preparations for the march. My dad would come home and I would question him, Dad, can I go? Can I go? So he said me and my sister could go. When we get to Selma, it was unique to see all these black people, so many of them. And when we really went to prepare to march, they said, put the young kids in the back because it may be a confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was all excited. I wasn't afraid, but I was just excited. And when we actually got in the march, we were singing "We Shall Overcome" and etc. And I was really all pumped up. And my sister told me, says, if something happens, hold my hand, and if we have to run, just run fast as you can. Well, I didn't think nothing would happen.
Mm-hmm.
So when we finally got to the bridge, and we seen all the police and sheriffs and people on horses with guns and things. I was like, why are we stopping? You know, why everybody stopping? So I decided to step out of line so I could see. I always wanted to see. And then when I seen the situation, I remember everybody kneeling down to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And my sister told me, kneel down. But I wanted to see. So I kneeled down, but I still wasn't concerned about prayer.
Right.
I just wanted
too
to
exciting.
see. Yes. And I remember we turned around and went back. And I was like, wow, what we go back for?
Now, were you packed? Like, were you, because it was a 20-mile march, or wasn't it? I mean,
Yes.
Did you have like tents or sleeping bags, or did you have like a backpack, or how were you prepared to, march that whole way?
Well, we had like a lunch box.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly just people was dehydrated. Water was most what everybody was craving for.
Mm-hmm.
I was so excited. I didn't get hungry or nothing. And at 10 or 11 years old, 20-mile hike was nothing.
An adventure.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what it was, an adventure. And they went back to reorganize. And I was inquisitive because I asked Dad, y'all scared?
Mm-hmm.
Afraid? Dad says, Dr. King said the time wasn't right. He said, son, sometimes you have to wait on the Lord to do something. Well, I didn't actually understood what he was saying at that particular time in life. So I was telling my sister, oh, they act like they're scared of these people.
Mm-hmm.
My sister was trying to explain to me the seriousness of this event. She said, people might get killed. And I told her in so many words, death ain't no enemy, because we all gonna die one day. And she says, well, do you want to die? I said, not really.
Not today.
Not today. And then when they got reorganized to go back, this when the excitement really started.
Now, was that the third march, or was that the same day?
No, it wasn't the same day.
Okay.
I only went on two. I didn't go to the third one. I went the first time, we turned back. The next time I went, all H broke loose.
Really?
Yes.
Tell us about it.
At first, they told us not to cross the bridge. But Dr. King decided to march on. And then we stopped right at the bridge. And they started singing, I'm not gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round. I remember that vividly. And then all of a sudden, the chief of police said charge, and they shot some tear gas, and they charged. And my sister was telling me, let's go, because we was back in the back. But I wanted to see. And then they came with the horses and was striking people down, basically just like the movie.
Right. We just saw it. Yes,
And so I remember us taking off. And I remember me and my sister hiding. We got off the highway and we just hid until our dad came and got us. But he had his head busted at that time.
Oh, my gosh.
And
So he had been attacked.
yeah, he was up front. He always hung out with Dr. King.
Mm-hmm. Was Dr. King on that one? Was he at the
Yes,
front?
yes, he was leading. He was leading. And I think they got arrested. And I remember telling him, because my sister told me, don't say nothing. We're going to call home, let Mom know we all right.
Sure.
But me, I told, Mom, they beat the people up. They shooting at us. And I told the whole story as I saw it. And my mom says, where is your dad? I says, I don't know where he is at that particular time. I don't know where he is.
Probably not what she wanted to hear.
And she panicked.
I'm sure she did.
But my mother never went on a march. My mother never sung "We Shall Overcome."
Mm-hmm.
And I used to question my mother and ask her, "Mama, you scared of white folks? What's wrong with you?" She said, "Son, you have to understand, the Lord will take care of everything." I said, "We got to do something, don't we?"
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "Well, I just pray that your dad don't get my kids killed."
Sure.
And I remember her telling my dad when we got back home, she says, "Negro, if anything happened to our children, you find you another planet to live on." And that day will always be in my memory. And well, few times it's in my memory, but that day especially, I would never forget.
Did you have the inkling back then that at one point in time they would be making movies and that they would have a 50th anniversary march and they would, the bridge would become, did you have a like an inkling at that time that you were at a historical moment?
I didn't have the vision at that time, but my dad and other ministers and people that was leading in the march, they had that.
They knew.
They knew. But me at that time, I was in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I lived it. But I do know that it had a psychological effect on me growing up.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. So let me ask you, the movie that you've seen the movie, obviously. Is it pretty accurate in its portrayal of how ugly things were?
Most definitely.
It was
Basically.
Was it worse? Was it that? I mean, you
was
saw people yelling and screaming when
screaming.
people were getting ready to march. It seemed like a lot of the townsfolk was not very receptive to the march. Was it that ugly?
The movie was
Or scary?
The movie was right on point.
Okay.
Basically,
Wow.
just like it was, and it was a day that you would never forget.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. Noah?
How did your father know Dr. Martin Luther King, and what was he like? And can you describe the interaction you had with him?
My dad was a minister, and 50s, 60s, and 70s, he led the state of Kentucky for equal rights, human rights, and civil rights. And him and Dr. King met in the 50s. I think Dad was going to one of those seminary colleges in Georgia at that time.
Mr. Taylor, we're gonna pause just really quickly. I want to come right back to this because this is a fascinating question, but we're gonna pause for YouTube's rules for station identification. So